Welcome back. It's another episode of the Better Learning Podcast. My name's Kevin Stoller, host of the show, and I'm excited about the guest today that we're going to have is David Ross. David, how are you doing? I'm going to pull you in right away.
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invite.
So we were connected by a mutual friend who's like, he's like, you guys just need to talk. Like, I think you'll like each other. You both have a passion for education and have different career paths under. So I have a little bit of knowledge of what your career path and kind of the unique ones. But I want to hear from the beginning to get our conversation started. What was school like for you?
I was your worst nightmare as a child, as a student. One is, by the time I was in sixth grade, I'd been in 4 schools in 3 states. And so I was always the new kid. So that was problematic for any child. Beyond that, false modesty aside, I tested at the 99th percentile in any standardized test. So I was a super smart kid with a bad attitude who was always an outsider. So that was actually part of the genesis of why I became a teacher, because I wanted kids who didn't feel accepted, or the outsider or the new kid or the smart kid who doesn't fit in, to have somebody who understood what their life was like.
So that's where you ended, but that's not where you were. You did not go in education right away, though, did you?
Oh, no. Actually, the mutual friend you mentioned, when we first started working together, it was in education, but we bonded over sports, because straight out of college, my first career was I was a gopher in a sports department of a large newspaper in Los Angeles. And within 2 months, I was made a cub reporter. Started out in high school sports, moved up into college sports, did professional tennis, auto racing, sailing. I did that for 16 years, and then had migrated into an editing position, but I never stopped sports writing. And sports has been integral to my life and honestly to everything I've ever done.
So why did you get back? I mean, sounds like you tested really well, but didn't really like, or you fought the system. And then you go kind of the reporter route, sports reporting. What happened then?
The transition is actually kind of interesting. Very few people ever ask me how I got from sports writer, which every man on earth thinks is the perfect job, and why did I become a 6th grade teacher? As I was a sports writer / editor, I would always go to the feature department because they get free books, and I've always been an avid reader. And I just accidentally started thumbing through picture books and discovered some Caldecott Award winners. And then I didn't even know what the Newbery Awards were. And I started reading Newbery Award winners. And I went to the features editor and I said, hey, can I start reviewing kids' books? And this was, mid-70s, early 80s. Nobody was doing this. And so I ended up writing a syndicated review of children's literature, and then built a database of Newbery winners that the American Library Association used. And I was starting to become disaffected with journalism because it was starting to take over by big corporations. So I wasn't prescient about what the web would do to it, but I was prescient about what business would do to it. And so I was dissatisfied with life as a sports writer. And it reignited my passion to work with children, reading these books constantly and interacting. And so I just decided I was going to continue working 4 to midnight as a newspaper guy. And I would go back to school, get another degree, get a teaching credential. And I teach from 8 to 3:30 and do my shtick in class. And after a year, I transitioned into 6th grade teacher.
Wow. So why, what was it that pulled you in? Like, what was so rewarding about that to be like, all right, I'm giving up, the last 16 years I've been working on?
I've always had kind of a chip on my shoulder because, again, my dad never even went to high school. And so we were working class poor. And again, we moved constantly as my dad moved jobs. So I always felt an outsider. Obviously came from a working class poor background. And so I immediately gravitated to kids like that. That was my comfort zone. So when I had a student teaching position, I student taught in middle school. And I thought, these guys are psycho. They're perfect for me. I always tell middle school teachers, you don't choose to teach middle school. You are born to teach middle school. And so I student taught in that. I thought, I want to teach these kids. These are my kids. So I ended up teaching in an urban middle school in LA for 6 years before I went on to Northern California to teach high school. But there's something emotionally about resonated with me, where these immigrant kids or these poor kids who didn't have all the opportunities, who kind of had chips on their shoulder. That was me. So I felt comfortable with them.
So is it fair to say once you got into the education stuff, somewhere along the line, the project-based learning, PBL, became a component of that?
That's actually an interesting transition too. So I went through my teacher training program, and when I did, I'd already had an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree. So I'm not a dumb human. And I went through this teacher training program, and basically I was told kids love textbooks, kids love worksheets, and kids love to be lectured on, and that's what you should do. So I tried that, and that did not go very well. So my first year was a spectacular flaming disaster as a sixth grade teacher. And out of self-defense, I started creating these multi-day, multi-week units. I didn't even call them projects. I didn't even have a name for it. I didn't even know project-based learning existed, and became very good. And I did some gamification, and that wasn't even a word in the early 90s. And I didn't know what that was either. I just did gamification without knowing what gamification was. In 2000, when we moved to Northern California, I got hired to teach at New Technology High School in Napa, California, which is widely considered to be one of the best PBL schools on the planet. And that's where I encountered, there is a systemic way to do this way of teaching, and it's called project-based learning. And it was like, oh, duh, I didn't know that. And then I learned about gamification. Oh, duh, I didn't know about that. So, and that's where I was introduced to the Buck Institute for Education, which became the next step in my career.
Yeah. So which has now been rebranded as PBL Works, and we've had a few people on there. We talk about PBL a lot because to me it just like blows me away that this isn't like taught at the college. Like when we're preparing students, like why is this not a, like, if not the number one component, or at least like a major component of preparing teachers? It still blows me away. Like,
I don't understand. One of the best programs for that, adopted it pretty early, is called the UTeach program out of University of Texas at Austin. And I see a lot of teacher prep programs at universities that make noises about this is what you do, but then they lecture students about doing PBL and make them read research about PBL, but they don't actually teach and model the behavior. So one of the most problematic things across the board is people lecturing people to do PBL rather than implementing a project as a way to model the behavior.
I go to a lot of educational conferences, and a lot of them about like learning environments. We have a furniture company, so we're talking about learning environments and how do you create the best learning environment that's flexible and and meets those requirements. A lot of times we're talking about daylight views and how to get engagement. And we go to these conferences, and it is unbelievable how everyone will go and just be in dark room and sit in these straight banquet chairs and watch somebody do a PowerPoint. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, why can we not get over this?
The disconnect is just fascinating to me. And I've been doing this for 30 years now, and the disconnect is still there. And you'll read it. This is the way the real world operates. The PBL is what everybody says. And these are the skills and behaviors you need to be successful in college and career and community. Everybody says. But then they lecture people about it. I just don't get the disconnect.
Yeah, I do not either. So now, like, when you look at your career and you look at kind of the phases in there, what are the highlights to you? What are the things that you're like, man, like if I can go back to that time, I would just relish that a little bit more.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me the most, I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm heading to China in a couple of days to do some presentations about project-based learning and AI, which AI has been my focus for the last couple of years. In one of the presentations I have to do for a group of provincial leaders, 3 different provinces, is to give them sort of a overview of PBL nationally in the United States and globally. So I've been reflecting upon it as well. And one of the things that strikes me is when I first started training people in project-based learning, it was literally 20 years ago, and it was considered a fringe pedagogy at best. And now it's an accepted pedagogy. I mean, it's universal. In China, it's actually in educational policy that PBL is the preferred pedagogy. So what has happened in 20 years for PBL? And to say that I saw that coming is ridiculous. Nobody saw that coming. That these people doing this fringe thing is now mainstream. So that's one of the things that strikes me the biggest. And the other thing that strikes me is everybody laments, and I went back to full circle. So I returned to become a classroom teacher in 2019, and I taught through the COVID years. Okay. So I wanted to see if the things that I've been preaching for 30 years actually worked. Some of them did, some of them didn't, but that's another story. But I actually think COVID, and everybody laments the learning loss and the horrible attendance rates now, but I actually think COVID was the shock to the system that will change education. And the second shock to the system is AI. And they're like right punch, left punch, right in a row. And the system, meaning educational, institutionalized education, is going to have to adapt and adapt rapidly because of those two things. So I'm more hopeful than I've ever been.
All right, so let's dig into that. So that shock of COVID, what's your perspective of what happened there?
See, I wrote about this, but it didn't, and I write a lot. What I had, a blog I wrote right in the middle of COVID was that there was an old saying that the only thing that are unquestionable in the existence of all humans is death and taxes. Well, that's not true for children. What is true for children is there's only one thing that was an inevitable, an immovable object in their lives, and that was education. There was no option but to attend school in both the mind of adults and of children. COVID showed parents and children that is no longer true. When you look at the attendance rates, because we learned some could learn well, some kids did better. Yes, there's significant learning loss across the board, but you don't have to physically be in school anymore to learn. And COVID taught us that. And that's the shock to the system that I'm most excited about. And so going to hybrid models or community-based, folding that into that, or internships or any of these things, I think COVID, by teaching everyone that school is not inevitable, physical presence in school is not inevitable in the life of children and parents, is a shock that the system needed.
What are you seeing? Because I've tried to analyze this and look at it from a bunch of different views, but for a while we were hearing, like by that probably like 2022, we were hearing like, we've just lost students who just didn't come back. Like, and depending on where in the country, in the district, they'd be like anywhere from like 8 to 10% saying we just lost them. We don't know where they went. And I started digging in and trying to see like, where are they? What have you seen? What are the things that you're seeing?
I've seen the same numbers, and it's appalling, and obviously there's an economic component to that. So I think back to my own childhood when we were moving constantly and my dad was shifting jobs and we were homeless for a while. So if a family is under economic duress, school is hard to pull off in terms of getting the kid there, getting the kid back there, getting the kid lunch, or even filling out the paperwork if there's a language impediment. My wife's an immigrant to the U.S. who didn't speak any English, so I understand what that mechanism is. So I think the economic duress that is placed upon parents just for regular public school is significant, and COVID unleashed that, unbared that. And again, going back to my point that COVID proved to everyone that school is not inevitable, is when a parent says, I can keep and I'm a single parent. I've got 3 kids. I've got a baby. I need daycare. I can't afford daycare. I have a 10-year-old kid who can do some online learning classes and not physically attend school. That's an economic decision that's easy for a parent to make.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, because I am with you, that I think there were some really good things that shock in the system, like had people reevaluate, and you start being like, okay, well, yeah, maybe there are other options. And I feel like we've seen kind of micro schools pop up, and you see a lot more of online or hybrid types of options. Like, to me, that's the creativity. I would say that constraint that fosters creativity. I'm excited. I feel like the rest of the country hasn't really caught up to see like there is a lot of diversity and diversification, fragmentation, whatever we want to call it, that's happened in education. That we're going to learn more of those stories over the next 5-10 years of being like, oh yeah, when that happened, I ended up doing this, and the districts may have felt like they lost those kids, but there's totally different, unique paths that I'm excited to hear more of those stories come out.
I am too, and I'm deeply concerned about the kids because I think it's the lower socioeconomic kids who have disappeared from school, quite literally, physically from school, and I'm concerned about what their life is like now. So I think, and I haven't seen enough of it to even have an informed opinion, but I think there's a window there for the private sector and the government to get involved in the terms of creating basically like, I'm brainstorming here, like these open air environments where parents and kids can come in and the kids can stay for a while and they've got access to devices and AI chatbots, online tutors, Conmingo, whatever it is that's out there. And there's trained adults in the room who can provide just-in-time support, but acknowledging the fact that these kids aren't going to be there every day. Because in my state, California has a huge issue with migrant labor, a lot of migrant labor education. So they have migrant ed policies in states where there's a large agricultural population, workers population. So I'm thinking that we need to have some kind of COVID response that mimics what happens with migrant ed policy. Is we have to have outreach that involves, transportation, that involves these community centers, whatever, and technical outreach. Give them devices. Devices are dirt cheap now. And have these centers where kids can check in. And then if their parents move for whatever reason to another community, they go to another one of these centers and they pick up.
I want to hear your AI interests and what you've been working on and researching, because obviously there's a lot of talk, and I feel like the first reaction is a little bit of fear for people in education. What are you seeing? What are you working on? What are you reading, doing, witnessing?
My first reaction is I'm an old man, and if I can do AI at a very high level, nobody's got an excuse. So this technological fear is nonsense, and I refuse to accept that. So let's get rid of that one right away. The other thing is I've always been an ed tech guy. So I was programming in the mid 70s. So I literally started programming 50 years ago. So I was one of the first teacher technology leaders for the state of California. I mean, ed tech's been my thing my entire life. When ChatGPT came online December 1 of 22, I thought, this is interesting, but I don't see what it is. So I started getting training. I got certified through Vanderbilt and LinkedIn Learning and Google and all these different OpenAI. And I see it now. I saw it then, but I deeply see it now and feel it's a teacher agency issue for me. It's because when you look at how much time teachers spend creating curriculum or assessments or rubrics or newsletters to parents or how-to step-by-step directions or formative assessments, or what a million different things, is the time spent in classroom is the smallest part of a teacher's workday. It's the time spent out. And if you can empower somebody with a tool that can save days, hours, weeks, months off of work time and creating all of the panoply of things that teachers need to run in a classroom, yay. So my big thing related to that is teacher empowerment and teacher agency. So the large technical companies, and I talk to a lot of them, I'm opposed to the curation of the experience, meaning districts are going to purchase some kind of platform that's going to mediate and curate the teacher AI experience. So rather than teach teachers how to use AI to create customized and personalized content, is we're going to give you a library of stuff and let our AI tell you what to do. I'm adamantly opposed to that. So my big thing is train teachers in basics of prompt engineering. I've got a free online prompt library that's PBL centric. This is how you create formative assessments, summative assessments, rubrics, checklists, sublists, plannings, lesson plans, everything. So empower teachers using AI.
Well, are you okay sharing that? Can we put that in our show notes of where people can find that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I actually, for the leadership, I've created the a supporting document. It's a Google Doc that's interactive. Is I've collected every AI state, district, and national policy, including acceptable use policies that are existent as far as I know as of today. And as new stuff comes in, I put it in there. So I have a central repository of every AI policy that exists on the world right now in terms of education. So when people say they don't know where to go.
All right. Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes so that people, because I do think that's a little bit of like, I don't even know where to start. What's allowed? How could I do this? What are the tools? And, and let's face it. I mean, a lot of the times the teachers are feel the constraints of like, they feel like, hey, I'm not allowed to go here. And giving that permission to be like, hey, it's okay. You can go here, go learn, go play, go
Exactly.
figure it out.
Related to issues, I was just in San Diego over this past weekend, the AI Revolution in Education show, about 10,000 educators and corporations and universities all talking about AI in education. And the thing that struck me the most was extraordinary passion and excitement in wide open possibilities, but the absolute chaos. So if I'm a teacher getting started and I see there's like 400 different products being thrown at the wall to see what sticks, I can understand why there's trepidation for teachers to get started.
Yeah. What's the sense at a conference like that? Is the sense that teachers are given, are encouraged to go out and try to figure it out? Or is it more where it is district centric, kind of like what you're talking about, where the district's going to say, this is what we have to do and follow this one district policy?
As far as I'm concerned, fortunately, the districts don't know what they're doing right now because there's really no district policies.
Wild West right now.
Yeah, it is definitely the Wild West. But again, I'm really worried that districts are going to approach this the way they approached almost every new educational technology device, tool, or software. Is then we're going to purchase something from a big corporation that curates the experience. Whereas the low cost, easiest thing to do is embed AI into teacher PD on a daily basis. Teach them how to write prompts every single day. There's a thing called the AI National Day is Friday. It's a U.S. thing. There's a website called AI Day National Day, and anybody can participate, upload prompts. There's things now called prompathons. I'm going to start one for PBL, where people just get on whatever platform. I still use X/Twitter because it's effective communication. And we're going to do prompathons where people just input prompts and download prompts. So I want it to empower teachers. I just don't want it to be another thing they buy.
Yeah. Well, PBL seems to be like a natural way to connect both of those things right now. What are you seeing? Like, what are you seeing from teachers using?
Yeah.
And that to me is always like those, the teachers that are willing to try something new, push the envelope. Those are always the ones that I want to learn from and be able to see, because they're the ones that are going to get to it 5 years before the district says, hey, this is what we're going to do.
Exactly. The people who have done project-based learning professional development like me for a very long time, and you mentioned PBL Works and they do phenomenal stuff, is we know the dirty little secret is that there's two skills involved in this. One is there are very good teachers who cannot design curriculum. Those are two discrete, separate skills. Not everybody has those. There are people who are really good curriculum writers who cannot teach to save their lives. Those are discrete skills. But when you do PBL, you're tasked with writing a contextualized, authentic project for your classroom and then delivering it. So you've got to meld these. I can't help individual teachers teach in their classroom. Impossible. But I can help them write projects using AI. So I've got an online class on how to use AI to write all the discrete structural elements of a project design. I've got 2 chatbots on a ChatGPT store that show people how to implement projects and how to write them. So one of the hardest things to write in a project design is a driving question. Well, you use AI, if AI has been trained on how to write driving questions, is I go in there and say, hey, this is standard X that my kids need to learn. I want to do a project. Can you gen up a driving question for me? AI does that for you.
I can't believe how much I use it like every day. Like the obvious one is just, Chat GPT, but as far as even like graphics and even, ones that are doing video, and then I've been evaluating the Apple Vision Pro. I don't know if you've had a chance to play around. Or
I haven't used it, but I sure would like to.
I can't wait to see what some of the, the ed tech teachers and people that are involved. The technology is so good that now I'm just like excited to see what apps get developed inside of it, and the fact that it's coming from Apple has that built-in trust that I think the schools are going to trust that. Like the technology was pretty good from like what Meta had out there with their Oculus, and but the schools were never going to let Facebook in, but they're gonna let Apple in.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the things that excites me, and this is an equity issue, is I think technology, including AI, is a good way to up-resource schools that aren't in economically advantaged areas or they're rural. They don't have access to a museum or a science center or experts, or their kids can't afford $1,000 to go to Washington, D.C. to go see some. I think AI upskills them, but I think things like the goggles that allow for virtual experiences are going to be powerful substitutes that are going to level up the playing field for kids who don't have economic opportunity.
Yeah, and I know everyone's first reaction is, oh, they're so expensive. Look at the cost on there. But when you really look at the capabilities and what you can do, and it opens up the door to things that were so ridiculously expensive to do, to now be able to do that with one device. Like I've been playing around with it for the last couple of months, and I'm like, oh, there are just so many ways that this can be used in education. I know there's people playing around with it. I just haven't heard as much. I'm actually kind of surprised that I'm not hearing more about it.
I haven't either, and I thought at this AI show that I was at a couple of days ago that there would be more hardware. There was no hardware at all.
Yeah, to me, that's I feel like like people are people that wanted to play around with ChatGPT and some of the the AI tools that have been out over the last year or so have been playing around with that, and I think when you play around, you see the power. Like they're just so much. I mean, like I said, I'm using it daily. I'm talking to my kids, and I know they're using it, so I'm not the one of like, well, don't use it. I want to find out, well, what are you using? And they have all these tools that I didn't know, that they can do, and be like, oh, now I can just take a picture of this, and it gets me started, and I have all this, and I'm not just like copy and pasting and cheating from it the way that people feared. But now I'm taking this as a starting point and being able to to go deeper or to be able to add my voice to it. I just don't. I don't get how people are not thinking about it and looking at this and recognizing that it fundamentally changes everything. Like if we're just going to treat this, as just like the new technology that we got to figure out how we can prevent, like kids from using it as a cheating tool. I just don't get it. Like I just, that's not the world we live in anymore.
I agree. And one of the things I've been saying for 30 years in terms of training teachers on project-based learning is whenever the issue of plagiarism, and this relates to AI, comes up, and I don't remember which professor said this to me a long time ago, but he said, why would you make an assignment that they can cheat on? And that's been my mantra ever since. Why wouldn't you create projects or units or whatever that the kids have to show their creativity and critical thinking and their collaboration on? Because that's the true measure of whether they've mastered content or not. So whether they can use AI to generate a 5-paragraph essay, who cares? I mean, is there an adult on this planet right now, if their boss says, I want to report on X, that they're going to sit there for 4 hours and type it up? Of course not. They're going to type notes into ChatGPT, let it create a draft. They're going to personalize the draft and turn it in. Why wouldn't we let kids do that?
Yeah. So I want to hear your perspective then. If you were sixth grade teacher now with the tools that are out there, what would be a good project, learning unit type of things that you would love to implement and just watch the kids work their way through?
So one of the things I'm proudest with from my project-based learning teaching days. So I was in a classroom for 13 years, 9 in middle school and 4 in high school, were the projects that were community-based. And I'll give you an example from here in Napa. I mentioned earlier that we have migrant laborers who work in the wine industry. This is a very wealthy, lovely place that I live in. But there are migrant laborers who come in 4 times a year to prune the vines, pick the grapes, crush everything. It's all done. So my students were required as 11th grade history students to understand the Great Depression and what labor policy was and the New Deal and all that kind of stuff. And I could lecture about that, and who cares? But they saw the migrant laborers in the fields here constantly. So what I did was I assigned them into groups they could choose, and they had to look at migrant workers with how they received healthcare in Napa, migrant workers, kids, how they went to school, how they ate, how they were transported, how they received banking and financial services, and more importantly, where they lived when they were here for months at a time. So each of the groups went out into the community and investigated these particular things. And then they came back and they presented to community members, the local hospital, the school district, the banks, everything about what their findings were. And it was profound. And so anchoring a project in community, to me, is the mover that's going to move the dial. It's going to engage kids because every kid lives in a neighborhood. And the world is theoretical. China, Japan, London means absolutely nothing to a sixth grader. But the park down the street or the church or the 7-Eleven, if they're selling drugs behind it, that's their life. They know that part. So by anchoring projects, I would have been much more intent on anchoring as every project that I could in the local community.
Yeah. Which I feel like is we had, and I'm trying to get my thoughts of how to phrase this, but we've had this like push where unfortunately, like I feel like a lot of the national politics went in and like kind of blew up the local communities, like it made its way into it, after COVID. Definitely one of, like maybe in the long run it's a good thing, but like we're looking at right now, like it's been a bad thing. So to hear like having the schools and the kids getting back into the community is probably exactly what we need right now too, right?
We do. And, one of my favorite things that both my sons participated in here in Napa is there's a river that runs through the middle of town, obviously called the Napa River. And for Earth Day, which is coming up shortly, is me and my kids would join the hundreds and hundreds of volunteers who would walk the river and pick up trash and put it in trash bags, and local businesses fed us, and we got T-shirts, and it was just so well organized. My kids felt more attuned to their community, and the river that runs through the middle of town, which nobody would normally pay attention to because it's there, is because of that river cleanup that we did every year. So engaging kids in their neighborhoods. I've got a good friend, Stephen Ritz, who if you want to amaze. So he and I have been close friends for 25 years. He does the Bronx Green Machine, and what he does with urban gardens is just staggering in its import, but it's about anchoring in community, and that's the work that matters.
Yeah. So we have a lot of school leaders that listen to this. We're affiliated with an organization called Education Leaders Organization, and it's a lot of superintendents. It's really their kind of like exclusive, kind of confidential peer network where they can talk to each other. And really share experiences. If you were going to speak to them and be like, how can they kind of empower or try to encourage that, kind of in this era where it does feel like it's still more about standardized and doing those, like, what are those things that you would want them to hear, and ways where they can try to empower the teachers to be able to feel like they can do that? Because I feel like my sense is that it's just not encouraged. Or in fact, you have to go over so many roadblocks to be able to do something, to actually have like kids do something outside of the walls of school.
One of my favorite things, and it comes from place-based learning, which is an offshoot of project-based learning, is called community mapping. And I would suggest that every school at every grade level do that at the first of the year. And I'll give you an example. When I taught in urban LA, I lived on the beach 17 miles away. So my life was very different than the school that I taught in because of 17 miles of distance. And the kids were 17 miles in a different direction from Disneyland. And a lot of my poor kids had never been to Disneyland before. So in order for my kids to even understand the community, when I taught ancient civilizations, ancient Greece, I had it required by standards to teach them about architecture. So what we did is we did a neighborhood walk, and we first studied forms, columns, Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian, and we looked at friezes, and we looked at arches, and then we walked around the school neighborhood and just looked at workers' houses, everybody, normal working class people's houses, and identified geographic architectural elements that came from ancient Greece. And the kids were like astonished that ancient Greece was alive in their little beaten down suburb of LA. So this idea of community mapping, and it benefits the teachers as well, because a lot of teachers don't live in the communities in which they teach, especially in cities. So everybody start with community mapping, get your community organizations involved with mapping, and then build off of that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't know the intent behind that. So to hear that community mapping is a great way for people to start thinking about it.
Second graders, you teach them to draw a map from how they get from home to school and put it in the park and the church and the supermarket they go by. So they learn compass rows, they learn directions, and they map their community. So everything starts with a community map as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, very cool. Well, as we're wrapping up, I want to go full circle on you. What sports would you want to follow? What would you want to be writing about right now? You got an assignment. What would it be?
It's funny you say that. And my oldest son is the assistant director of athletics at Cal. And so I always I went for a long time when I left the sports writing industry. I didn't watch sports. And I always told him, I said, if you make pizza for a living for 17 years, the last thing you want to do is eat pizza. So I was off of sports for a long time, but it has been decades since that has happened. So I full-blown sports, and I'm so proud that my son is involved in the sports industry as well. So I'm like a normal human now. So I've been watching. Caitlin Clark ignited my interest. I love college men's basketball, but the last couple of years, because of the portal and NIL, I've lost interest in that as well. Caitlin Clark reinvigorated my interest in basketball and women's basketball. I watched the entire NCAA women's bracket because of her. So, and I'm excited about the WNBA because of her and the other women like Angel Reese and Paige Brookers. I love women's basketball right now. And then the one sport I'd like to cover because I'm an old man is I think pickleball is the coolest thing ever. So
are you playing?
I want to be a professional. No, because I have a torn rotator cuff. No. So I have to have surgery, but pro pickleball, that would be my thing.
Yeah. Well, it is cool to see. I mean, it's just taken over. I feel like every tennis court is getting converted into a pickleball court. Well, and I'm with you too, with Caitlin Clark and watching that. But I also grew up my high school, our women's basketball team was awesome. So we had several players that played Division I. We had one that Tamika Catchings. I don't know how much you follow, but she started out at our high school. So watching her through the WNBA and being a Hall of Famer through there, it's awesome to see that. And I'm with you. I feel like the men's. I didn't really think about how much it's the portal and NIL, but it's definitely the fact that they're not staying for 4 years. That was the appeal. It's the fact that you can have rematches, between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, like be able to do that. Like, it just doesn't happen in the men's sports anymore.
No, there's no loyalty to program. And I understand that if somebody offers you, if I was 18 years old and somebody offered me $4 million to go play at another school, yes, I'm going to another school to play there. I understand the economics of that. But from a fan perspective, it kind of breaks my heart. And the other thing that breaks my heart, and our mutual friend will know this, is I'm a diehard Pac-12 guy. And to see the end of my Pac-12 is heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the conferences I still don't understand what it's going to look like. Yeah. And I'm a basketball one here, and we're sitting here in a day of, like, I always say that the preseason is finally over and playoffs are starting now. So I'll actually start watching some of the NBA now, but man, that's a long 82 game preseason. To get to this point.
It is a long season. And by marriage, I'm a Warriors fan, but I fell in love with when the Warriors were at their very best, when they were just destroying everyone. It was beautiful basketball. And even though I'm a short guy, the one thing I will go to my grave not being able to do is dunk a basketball. And everybody says, "What if you could do one thing, what would it be?" And I'd say dunk a basketball. So watching beautiful basketball, and now that the NBA is in the playoffs, it's beautiful basketball again.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time. Anything I didn't ask you that I should be asking you about?
No, I mean, I got a riff about things that I love, sports and education. So I just deeply appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, it's great hearing your perspective and knowing how much you're looking into AI too, because I agree. That is the tool that I think could really help a lot of the concerns that we've heard of, just like how much is getting thrown on the teachers' plates and how much time and grading and all those things. Be like, you know what, this is really going to help them if they dive in.
Exactly.
It's going to be a really great teacher's tool. And then obviously looking at ways that how do we prepare the next generation? In a lot of ways, it's almost like just get out of the way, watch them do it. They're going to teach. You're going to see, learn from them. You're going to see what they're doing.
Exactly. They're going to teach us.
Yep. Well, to the listeners, if you're not already a subscriber, just go ahead and hit the button wherever you're listening from. BetterLearningPodcast.com is the hub for everything. We try to get some diverse viewpoints of everything from school leaders to the people that are supporting schools, from architects and vendors that are supporting, to really just the change makers and the people who are passionate about it. So we're always trying to get some different perspectives. So that's a place at BetterLearningPodcast.com is if you have ideas or things you want to hear about more, or if you have suggestions or you think you'd be a good guest, go to BetterLearningPodcast.com. And David Ross, thanks again. I really appreciate your time. Great meeting you.
I appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you.
The views and opinions expressed in the Better Learning Podcast are those of myself as an individual and of my guest, and do not necessarily represent the organizations we work for, the Association for Learning Environments, K-12, Education Leaders Organization, or Second Class Foundation.